Hello, and welcome to the Murder House Radio Show. I'm your host, X, and on this show we will be covering serial killers, mass shooters, disappearances, true crime, and all of that good dark stuff. The Murder House Radio Show will be a radio show slash podcast. I will be uploading videos every Friday and possibly Mondays at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So sit down, get comfortable, grab some coffee or your favorite beverage, turn off the lights, and enjoy the show. Today's show will be on Edmund Emil Kemper III, born December 18th, 1948. He is an American serial killer, serial rapist, and cannibal, and necrophile who murdered 10 people, including his paternal grandparents and his mother. He is noted for his large size. He stands at 6 feet 9 inches, which is 2.06 meters. And for his height, his intellect, possessing an IQ of 145, Kemper was nicknamed the Co-Ed Killer, as most of his victims were female college students. Edmund was born in California. Edmund had a disturbed upbringing. His parents divorced as a child. He moved to Montana with his abusive mother before returning to California, where he murdered his paternal grandparents. He was 15 years old when he committed this murder. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic by court psychiatrist and was sentenced to an state hospital as a criminally insane juvenile. He was later released at the age of 21 after convincing psychiatrists he was rehabilitated. He was able to do this because of his high IQ, which, he's very manipulative and smart because of that, obviously. Kemper was regarded as a non-threatening by his future victims. He targeted young female hitchhikers during his spree, luring them into his vehicle and driving them to secluded areas where he would murder them before taking their corpses back to his home to be dismembered, decapitated, and violated. Kemper then murdered his mother and one of her friends before turning himself in to the authorities. That's also a really weird part because not many serial killers actually turn themselves in. So he's also known as the Gentle Giant because he's a very nice man, other than when he's butchering co-eds. Edmund Kemper was born in Burbank, California on December 18th, 1948. He was the middle child and only son born to Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper and Edmund Emil Kemper II. Edmund II was a World War II veteran who, after the war, tested nuclear weapons in the Pacific Proving Grounds before returning to California, where he worked as an electrician. His wife often complained about his electrician job, and he later said suicide missions in wartime and atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with her. Well, that's quite the statement right there. He said that living with her affected him more than being in the war did. So, weighing 13 pounds as a newborn, Kemper was a head taller than his peers by age 4. Early on, he exhibited antisocial personality behavior, such as cruelty to animals. At the age of 10, he buried a pet cat alive. Once it died, he dug it up, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. Kemper later stated that he derived pleasure from successfully lying to his family about killing the cat. At the age of 13, he killed another family cat when he perceived it to be favoriting his younger sister, Aline Lee Kemper, over him, and he kept pieces of it in his closet until his mother found them. That's kind of messed up, man. Kind of messed up, but textbook serial killer behavior right there, if you ask me. Kemper had a dark fantasy life. He performed rites with his younger sister's dolls that culminated in his removing their heads and hands. On one occasion, when his older sister, Suzanne Huey Kemper, teased him and asked why he did not try to kiss his teacher. I guess he had a crush on his teacher. He replied, "If I kiss her, I'd have to kill her first." That's creepy coming from like a 13-year-old. He also recalled that as a young boy, he would sneak out of his house armed with his father's bayonet and go on his second grade teacher's house to watch her through the window. Holy. He stated in later interviews that some of his favorite games to play as a child were gas chamber and electric chair. Damn. So he's a messed up kid, in which he asked his younger sister to tie him up and flip an imaginary switch. He would then tumble over and wither on the ground, pretending that he was being executed by gas inhalation or electric shock. So he was the victim. Holy. Well, in his imaginary game, he was anyway. He also had near-death experiences as a child, once when his elder sister tried to push him in front of a train, and another time when she successfully pushed him into the deep end of the swimming pool, where he almost drowned. So, yeah, pretty messed up childhood, pretty traumatized. Kemper did have a close relationship with his father and was devastated when his parents separated in 1957. So he was 1957, and he was born, when did I say he was born? Just give me a second. 1957, he's born 1948, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57. So he was 9 when they separated. Yeah, that would be a hard hit. Hard hit for a 9-year-old. Yeah, my parents did divorce when I was in maybe grade 2. But yeah, when they divorced, this caused him to be raised by Carlene in Helene, Montana. Sorry about those pronunciations. He had a severely dysfunctional relationship with his mother and neurotic, domineering alcoholic who was frequently belittled and humiliated and abused him. Holy. So his mother was an alcoholic who abused him and treated him very poorly. His mother often made her son sleep in the locked basement because she feared that he would harm his sisters, which is understandable if it is known what he was already up to. Regularly mocking him for his large size as he stood 6'4" and by the age of 15. Holy. But yeah. Not that it was right. She locked him in the basement. I said it was understandable, I believe. So, don't fucking mutilate me in the comments. No pun intended. Berated him as a real weirdo. She also refused to show him affection out of fear that she would turn him gay. Holy, she's a real cunt. No offense to anybody who finds offense to the word cunt. It's a fun word to say. And told the young Kemper that he reminded her of his father and that no woman would ever love him. Jesus. Kemper later described her as a sick, angry woman. So I think Kemper's mother and grandmother were the reasons he was driven to kill, other than his already, they were a big part of it, it seemed. It's thought that the mother suffered from borderline personality disorder, which made sense, because, why be so cruel to your kid for, no reason? At age 14, Kemper ran away from home in an attempt to recoil with his father in Van Nuys, California. Once there, he learned that his father had remarried and had a stepson. Kemper stayed with his father for a short while until the elder Kemper sent him to live with his paternal grandparents, who he ended up killing, who lived on a ranch in the mountains in Norfolk, California. Kemper hated living in Norfolk. He described his grandfather as senile and said that his grandmother was constantly emasculating him and my grandfather. So a spitting image of the mother. No wonder where she learned that from. Yeah, this sounded like they're both cunts. His first murder took place on August 27th, 1964, when he was 15, as I said before. Kemper was sitting at the kitchen table with his grandmother, and when they had an argument, and he got mad, and Kemper stormed off and retrieved a rifle that his grandfather had given him for hunting. Because, hunting's normal. It's a normal thing for hunting and 15-year-olds to have guns. It really is in some parts. That wasn't supposed to be sarcastic. He went into the kitchen and fatally shot his grandmother in the head before firing twice more into her back. Some accounts mentioned he also suffered multiple so they think he may have stabbed her a bunch of times after she was dead. Kemper's grandfather came back he came back from the grocery store, and Kemper went out and shot him in the driveway. He said he shot him because he didn't want him to have to see his wife dead. He then proceeded to phone his mother, and she told him to call the local police, and he did as he was told. He waited calmly to be taken into custody. So then he was arrested, and he said he just wanted to see what it felt like to kill grandma. That's fucked up coming from a 15-year-old. Who interviewed Kemper at length during adulthood, wrote, in his way, he had avenged the rejection of both his father and his mother. Kemper's crimes were deemed incomprehensible for a 15-year-old to commit, and the court's psychiatrist diagnosed him with the paranoid schizophrenia. Yeah, I said that. Then sent him to the state hospital, a maximum security facility that held mentally ill convicts. So at the hospital, the staff and the psychiatrists and stuff disagreed with the court's findings. Their report stated that Kemper showed no flight of ideas, no interference with thoughts, no expressions of delusions or hallucinations, and no evidence of bizarre thinking. I don't know about that, but interesting, because, there's a bunch of different doctors and stuff saying all that, They also observed him to be intelligent and introspective, intentionally testing measures his IQ at 136 over 2 standard deviations above average. Interesting. He was re-diagnosed with a less severe condition, a personality trait disturbance, passive-aggressive type. Interesting. Later on in his time at the hospital, Kemper was given another IQ test, which gave him a higher result of 145. Smart dude. So they think he faked it, because, you don't be that crazy, and then you can also be that smart. But he was also a prisoner, and he was trained to administer psychiatric tests to other inmates. So he was basically a doctor's assistant. So one psychiatrist later said he was a very good worker, and this is not the typical of a sociopath. He really took pride in his work. Yeah, that's, you could definitely see how you might have been trying to play them into his hands. Kemper also became a member of the J Keys while in the hospital, and said he developed some new tests and some new scales on the Minnesota Multifacet Personality Inventory. Interesting. I hope I said that all right. Specifically an overt hostile scale. During his work with the psychiatrist after his second arrest, Kemper said that being able to understand how these tests functioned allowed him to manipulate his psychiatrist, and admitted that he learned a lot from the sex offenders whom he administrated tests. Yeah, see, I told you he manipulated them. Well, I didn't tell you, but I knew it. Called it, bro. I called it. For example, they told him that to avoid leaving witnesses, it's best to kill a woman after raping her. So that's where he got his ideas to do what he did, I guess. Makes sense, makes sense. So on his 21st birthday, December 18th, 1969, he was released from the hospital against the recommendation of psychiatrists at the hospital. So I guess they just couldn't hold him any longer since he was technically a full-fledged adult. And he was released into the care of his mother, who had remarried and taken the surname Strandberg. Strandberg, huh? And then divorced again. Holy. Okay. A short drive from where she worked as an administrative assistant at the University of California, Santa Cruz, Kemper later demonstrated further to his psychiatrist that he was rehabilitated, and on November 29th, 1972, his juvenile record was permanently expunged. I don't think your record should be expunged if you murdered 2 people. Just saying, that makes no sense. I don't care how old you were, you still killed 2 people. But still, I don't know, who am I to say anything? The last report from this probation psychiatrist read, and I don't want to read that all. You guys can go search that up in the link down in the description, because it will be there, as I am going to skim through this stuff. I'm not going to read the whole article, because, I don't want to get copyrighted or anything. So Kemper, while staying with his mother, attended community college because this was part of his parole requirements, and then he hoped he would become a police officer. That'd be interesting. Thought he was rejected because of his size at the time of his release from the hospital. Oh, okay, so he stood 6'9", so he's rejected for being too tall to join the cops, but they nicknamed him Big Ed. Kemper maintained relationship with Santa Cruz police officers despite his rejection to join the force, and became a self-described friendly nuisance, at a bar called the Jury Room, a popular hangout for local law enforcement officers. Yeah, he did hang out around the cops a lot, and he would listen in to their conversations about his murders he committed, and he would try to gain a lot of information about the murders to see what they'd found, if they had any suspects, all that kind of stuff. And all the while, they didn't suspect a single thing. It's pretty interesting. Pretty smart, too. Just the guy in plain sight. You don't really expect the guy who's closest to you. Oh, it's not Big Kemp, man. He's too nice. He's too nice, even though he did kill his 2 fucking grandparents. But I shouldn't have laughed at that. But if they kept him in jail or a closer eye on him or whatever, they could have avoided more murders. But Kemper worked a series of minuscule jobs before gaining employment with the State of California Division of Highway, known as the California Department of Transportation. During this time, his relationship with his mother remained toxic and hostile, the two having frequent arguments that their neighbors often overheard. Kemper later described the arguments he had with his mother around this time, stating the following: "My mother and I started writing on our horrendous battles, just horrible battles, violent and vicious. I've never been in such a vicious verbal battle with anyone. It would go to fists with a man, but this was my mother, and I couldn't stand the thought of my mother, and I do these things. She insists on it, just over stupid things. I remember one roof raiser was over whether I would have my teeth cleaned." What? Okay then. So he eventually saved money and he moved out to live with a friend in Alameda, California, but he is still unable to escape his mother because she would call him and just come by randomly. He often had financial difficulties, which resulted in him frequently returning to his mother's apartment in a Potts. So I guess he was just asking for money, and they were tied together because he was struggling and she could help him, and I guarantee she liked that, so she could fuck with him, if that makes sense. At a Santa Cruz beach, Kemper met a student from Turlock High School to whom he became engaged in March 1973. The engagement was broken off after Kemper's second arrest, and his fiance's parents requested her name not to be revealed to public. Interesting. His killing spree was pretty short. It lasted between May 1972 and April 1973, where he killed 8 people, and this was including his mother. He would pick up the female students who were hitchhiking and take them to an isolated area where he would shoot, stab, smother, or strangle them. He would then take their bodies back to his home where he decapitated them, performed erumato on their severed heads. Oh, he fellatioed their severed heads, had sexual intercourse with their corpses, and then dismembered them. So, some textbook serial killer stuff, but nonetheless messed up. During this 11th month murder spree, he killed 5 college students, 1 high school student, his mother, and his mother's best friend. Yep. Kemper has stated in interviews that he often searched for victims after having arguments with his mother, that she refused to introduce him to women attending the university where she worked. Oh. So maybe if he killed his mother first, he could have just avoided all these other murders. Maybe. He recalled she would say, "You're just like your father. You don't deserve to get to know them." Psychiatrist and Kemper himself have espoused the belief that the young women were surrogates for his ultimate target, his mother. Yep, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense right there. So his first 2 victims were Marianne Pesce, Pesce, and Anita Lucius. On May 7th, 1972, Kemper was driving in Berkeley, California, when he picked up the 2 18-year-old hitchhiking students. He said he was going to drive them to their university, but he drove around for a bit, and then they may have fell asleep or something. Then he diverted off course and eventually got to a secluded wooded area near Alameda, California, in which he was familiar with from his work as a highway department. So, he handcuffed Pesce and locked Lucius in the trunk. I hope I said those right. Then he stabbed and strangled Pesce to death, subsequently killing Lucius in a similar manner. Kemper later confessed that while handcuffing Pesce, he brushed the back of his hand against one of her breasts, and that embarrassed him. He added that he said, "Whoops, I'm sorry," or something like that, and then proceeded to kill her, which is kind of strange. But Kemper put both of the women's bodies in the trunk of his Ford Galaxy and returned to his apartment. He was stopped on the way by a police officer for having a broken taillight, but the officer did not detect the corpses in the car. Kemper's roommate was not at home, so he took the bodies into his apartment, where he photographed and had sexual intercourse with the naked corpses before dismembering them. He then put the body parts into plastic bags, which he later abandoned near Loma Priet Mountain, before disposing of Pesce's and Latricia's severed heads in the ravine. Kemper engaged with fellatio with both of them. In August of that year, Pesce's skull was found on Lumen Prayer Mountain, and an extensive search failed to turn up the rest of the body remains or a trace of. So they were both never found. Like, their bodies were never found, and only the one girl's head was found. So then he proceeded to kill his next 6 victims in a similar manner. Those victims are Akio Ku, and this was on the evening of September 14th, 1972. Cindy Schell on January 7th, 1973. Rosalind Thorpe and Allison Liu, and this was on February 5th, 1973. Akia Ku was a 15-year-old dancing student who missed her bus and decided to hitchhike. He again drove her to a remote area, pulled a gun on her, and accidentally locked himself out of the car. However, she let him back inside the car as he previously gained the 15-year-old's trust while holding her at gunpoint. Back inside the car, he proceeded to choke her unconscious, rape her, and kill her. Kemper subsequently packed Ku's body into the trunk of his car and went to a nearby bar to have a few drinks and returned to his apartment, where he later confessed that after exiting the bar, he opened the trunk of his car, admitting catching like a fisherman. Admiring his catch like a fisherman. Holy. Back in his apartment, he had sexual intercourse with the corpse, then dismembered it and disposed of it. Yep. But she did not receive any response regarding her daughter's location or status, so never found. Holy. So, yeah, and then he did the same with all these other victims. Holy. With Cindy Schall, he did the same thing, but he, was at his mother's house or something. He had sexual intercourse with the corpse, and then, he removed the bullet from the corpse, then he dismembered and decapitated her in his mother's bathtub. He kept the severed head for several days, regularly engaging with sexual acts with it, and then buried it in his mother's garden facing towards her bedroom. That's whack. After his arrest, he stated that he did this because his mother always wanted people to look up to her. That's whack, but damn. He discarded the rest of Schall's remains by throwing them off a cliff over the course of the following few weeks. All except her head and right hand were discovered and pieced together like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. Yep, that's pretty wild. On April 20th, 420, no jokes, I shouldn't joke, 1973, after coming home from a party, Edmund Kemper's mother awoken her son arriving home. While she was sitting in bed reading a book, she noticed Kemper entered her room. She said, "I suppose you're going to want to sit up and talk all night now." Kemper replied, "No, good night." He then waited for her to fall asleep, and then he returned to bludgeon her with the claw hammer and slit her throat with a knife. He subsequently decapitated her, engaged in sexual acts with her severed head, then used it as a dartboard. Kemper stated that he put her head on a shelf and screamed at it for an hour, threw darts at it, and ultimately smashed her face in. He also cut out her tongue and larynx and put them in the garbage disposal. However, the garbage disposal could not break down the tough vocal cords, and ejected the tissue back into the sink. That seemed appropriate, Kemper later said, as much as she bitched and screamed and yelled at me over the years. So he did that last part because she verbally abused him and berated him and all that stuff. So that was his form of getting even, I guess you could say. Kemper hid his mother's body in the closet and went to a nearby bar to drink. And then he invited his mother's best friend, 59-year-old Sarah Taylor, Sally Hallett, over to the house to have dinner and watch a movie. When she arrived, Kemper strangled her to death to create a cover story that his mother and her friend had gone away together on vacation. He subsequently put the corpse of the friend, in the closet, obscured any outward signs of disturbance, and left a note for police. It read, "Approximately 5:15 a.m. Saturday. No need for her to suffer any more at the hands of this horrible, murderous butcher. It was quick, asleep the way I wanted it. Not sloppy and incomplete. Gents, just a lack of time. I got things to do." Kemper then fled the scene non-stop to Pueblo, Colorado after taking caffeine pills. This was a 1,000-mile journey. He had a bunch of guns and ammo in the car, and he believed that he was a target of a manhunt. After not hearing any news on the radio about the murders of his mother and her friend, he went to Palato, or to the city or whatever. He found a phone booth and called the police. He confessed to the murders of his mother and her friend, but the police did not take his call seriously, and they told him to call back at a later time. Several hours later, Kemper called again, asking to speak to an officer he personally knew. He confessed to that officer of killing his mother and her friend, then waited for the police to arrive and take him into custody, where he also confessed to the murder of 6 students. While asked in a later interview why he turned himself in, Kemper said the original purpose was gone. It wasn't serving any physical or real or emotional purpose. It was just a pure waste of time. Emotionally, I couldn't handle it much longer. Towards the end there, I started feeling the folly of the whole damn thing. And at that point of near exhaustion, near collapse, I just said to hell with it and called it off. So it almost sounds like he could have been saved if he was gotten to earlier. Or if he killed his mother instead of his grandparents, he might have been fine, as messed up as that sounds, but I have no clue. That's definitely interesting. His story is more on the sad side of things, if you think about it. On May 7th, 1973, Kemper was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. He was assigned a public defender, Jim Jackson. Due to Kemper's explicit and detailed confession, his counsel's only option was to plead not guilty by reasons of insanity to the charges. Kemper twice tried to commit suicide in custody. His trial went ahead on October 3rd, 1973. 3 appointed court psychiatrists found Kemper legally sane. One of the psychiatrists investigated his juvenile records and the diagnosis that he was once prescribed or whatever. So, yeah, that's crazy. Nevertheless, Fort determined that Kemper was fully cognizant in each case and stated that Kemper enjoyed the prospect of infamy associated with being labeled a murderer. Kemper later recanted the confrontation of cannibalism, so he denied the cannibalism, like he took it back after he admitted it, basically. California used M. Nagant's standard, which helped that of the defendant to establish a defense on the grounds of insanity. It must be clearly proven that at the time of the committing of an act, the party accused of was laboring under such a defect of reason from disease of mind, and not knowing the nature of quality of the acts he was doing, or if he did know it, that he did not know he was doing it, and it was to prove he didn't know what he was doing, and he didn't know it was wrong, basically. Word. Kemper appeared to have known that the nature of his crime acts was wrong, and he had shown signs of malice afterthought. On November 1st, Kemper took the stand. He testified that he killed, that his actions could only have been committed by someone with an aberrant mind. He said 2 beings inhabited his body, and that when the killer personality took over, it was a kind of blackout. So on November 8th, 1973, the 6-man, 6-woman jury deliberated for 5 hours before declaring Kemper sane and guilty on all counts. He asked for the death penalty, requesting death by torture. It was refused. He instead received 7 years to life for each count, with these terms to be served concurrently, and was sentenced to the California Medical Facility. So Kemper still resides in prison till this day, and he's been featured, like not himself, but in actors in several FBI profiling movies and serial killer movies. Also, fun fact, he does audiobooks in prison or whatever, and he also does the introduction for people coming into the prison. Well, he did at one time, I heard on another podcast. So that's it. That's Edmund Kemper for you. Thank you for listening to this episode on the Murder House Radio Show. Check out the social medias and the sources in the description below. See you next episode. This is your host X signing off.